All right. Thank you for coming to my talk. I want to thank the organizers. This is my first InfoSec talk, so I'm just really excited to be here. And yeah, my talk is about building your own APIs, empowering yourself to um, just try out your ideas for APIs. Um, so my name is Andrew Katz. I'm a senior security engineer at Jamf, working on security automation. Really big fan of Mac OS, working at Jamf, and we use Python a lot when we're building stuff. I have a blog down there. Not too much stuff on there, but if you want, check it out. Um, so thinking about this talk, let's consider this scenario. Um, as security engineers, some of us use third-party APIs a lot, and sometimes there's, and I don't want to like incriminate myself here, but sometimes there's like this really good API where the data that it has is like super valuable to you, but you can't afford it because it's like 300K per year. So you start like using free API keys and trying to like round robin those together, which is just like a really shitty situation to be in. So this talk is just like not putting yourself in that situation and empowering yourself to think of how you can build that API yourself. Maybe it won't be as good, but it's yours, and you can do what you want with it. So building APIs is creative, it's empowering, and it's rewarding. You can start small and build an API that does one thing really well, and you can work your way up to building web apps that have like interfaces for users and SSO, and actually start using them within your organizations and your teams. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about where can you find data to actually use in your APIs. And it doesn't really matter what stack you use. Honestly, what you're most comfortable with is probably the best. But for sake of having like examples and stuff, we're going to talk about FastAPI and Docker and SQLite. So the case for FastAPI, if you haven't heard of it, there's also like some web frameworks within Python are also like Flask and Django. They're all really amazing. It doesn't really matter which framework you use, again, but FastAPI is pretty nice because it has like automatic, Swagger docs and a lot of plugins for authentication and authorization. And it's relatively fast compared to other frameworks. Like if you compare it to Flask, FastAPI is going to be a lot faster. And just a warning, I'm going to show some code. I'm so sorry. There's quite a bit of it. I know that's breaking like the cardinal rule of presentations, but I just wanted to show you like what does this actually look like when you're building your own APIs. And the code doesn't include things that you'd see in production. Like we're not going to have like bearer token auth with these APIs. There's not going to be like error handling, maybe a little bit, but 50% of it is like generated by ChatGPT. So I just wanted to put that disclaimer out there. But hopefully you can see this okay. Try to make it as big as possible, but this is like the most simple FastAPI app that I could conjure up. And basically what it is, it's, what is my IP? This is kind of like a throwback to things like IP chicken and ICANN has IP, if you're familiar with that. But what it does essentially is up here, we're just importing some libraries, FastAPI, 2 libraries from it, and then we're instantiating an instance of a FastAPI app so we can start doing things with it. And down here, you have what is called a route, and that's basically with your web app, if you go to like / whatever page, this defines what that page is going to do when you actually load it. So basically, when someone makes a request to this route, this get-IP, it's just pulling the host IP address from that client and displaying it in JSON. And here's kind of an example of what you would see when you query this endpoint. I want to give a shout out to HTTPIE or HTTPI, but that's kind of that command line up there. It's a really nice CLI interface if you're building APIs like this. Really recommend checking it out if you're like messing around with curl. It's just a lot easier than that. But yeah, this is the response it gives us, and it's just your local host IP because we're just building this locally. I wanted to talk a little bit about SQLite. So again, doesn't really matter too much like what database you're using. Just use whatever you're comfortable with. But SQLite is really nice if you need, if your API is like really read heavy. Like an example that we're gonna go into is an IP reputation API. And that one is gonna be super read heavy. So just a really nice case for using SQLite. And instead of having a server, it's just a single file or just a few files on disk, depending on how you have it set up. So just very easy. I think it might be the most popular database out there, actually. Docker, really nice, rapid development. I'm just familiar with this, so that's kind of what we're using for the example. And again, I keep saying this, but the API is yours to sculpt. Use whatever tools you want, what you're most comfortable with. You'll still be an API artisan. So an IP reputation API. This is the most simple example of a response that we would want. Basically, the IP address that we looked up and the reputation list that we matched that IP address in. So for getting reputation data, depending on what you have access to, I think GitHub is a really, really great place to pull these lists from. Firehole, I think that organization has been around for a really long time, but they have a GitHub repo where they have like, I don't know, 20 or 30 lists that get updated, if not several times, like at least daily, they're updating those. Abuse.ch has ThreatFox and Feodo Tracker for like C2 IPs that you can pull in. You have Alien Vault, but something really interesting that you can also do, a lot of popular VPN providers like Mulvat and Nord will actually have like an endpoint where they'll display all of their server IPs. So you can actually pull those into your reputation list as well, which is very useful. As far as using Docker and SQLite together in this example, what we would do basically, when your container starts up, you can run a script that will create your SQLite database and basically create a table called reputation info, and that would have your IP address and the reputation like list where you found that IP in that you're gonna match to. So you would have a script that basically makes requests to all of those reputation lists and pull and parse all of those IPs into the table. For example, you know, like IP 1234 goes into this list. And as far as the code, again, this looks very similar to the first one that we looked at. We're just pulling in libraries for FastAPI, but we're also importing SQLite. And what's interesting, again, SQLite is just on disk. So this database URL is just pointing to a file path, which is very nice. And then we just have a function here that allows us to connect to that database, which we'll use further on down here. So again, we specify another route. This one is /IP-reputation. And the function for it, it just wants an IP address. And again, we're not doing any error checking here. We're not checking like, is this actually an IP? Something that you probably might want to do in production. But yeah, we make a connection using that get database connection function and basically do a SQL query where basically get anything from the IP reputation table that matches this IP address and then close the connection. Down here, it says if row, so if you found something, return me a JSON response with the IP and reputation info, like we saw before, as like, this is the most simple response that we would want. Otherwise, if you don't find anything, just return a 404, not found. But yeah, that's enough code. I know I broke some rules there. Hopefully you're able to follow along. But I just wanted to go through like, what are some interesting ideas for things that you could do, you know, other than IP reputation, other than the other example. And one thing that I've been thinking about a lot is like, there's so many good open source tools out there that we know and love. Thinking about things like, you know, Trufflehog or all the tools from, you know, Project Discovery like Nuclei. So what if we actually pull these binaries onto like a Docker container and put them behind an API so we can start using them in like automated workflows. You can scale up those containers and just make, you know, like a orchestrated nuclei scanner that you can use. So another, yeah, API, all the things. You can think about things like WAF automation. You can create an API that interacts with your WAF and, you know, give more information about like why that IP was blocked. Kind of make like a middleware basically for allowing people to block or like check the block list and things like that. You can do Slack war rooms with like the slash command in Slack, which is really nice. And creating JIRA tickets from vulnerabilities is another one. Little bit controversial based on how many vulns that you actually have. And thinking again about web apps, it gets really interesting when you basically create a front end to your APIs. So you can actually render, instead of like a JSON response, render HTML instead and allow people to have input. And so you can start creating useful tools, you know, either for the community or for your internal team. And I want to give a shout out to Coinbase. They had this blog post that was super inspiring for me. This is like an internal response app that they have where you can look up users by their email address or their MacBook serial number, what have you. But it basically streamlines, you know, asking a lot of questions at once. Like you can get a general overview, login activity, what are all their Okta groups, and so on. So I actually took a stab at this, making my own version. All this information is just like test info, but this is not something that we use internally at Jamf, just kind of like a proof of concept for if we wanted to do something like this. Yeah. Another cool one that I've seen, this one is kind of like have I been pwned, but it's have I been typo squatted, basically. And I would imagine the person that built this probably used some open source tooling behind here, like maybe OpenSquat or DNS Twist, something like that. But I think this one, like, this really embodies the spirit of this talk. Build cool shit that's useful for the community. There's also the red team perspective. So if you're building your own APIs and you're like a web app pen tester, then you kind of know, like through trial and error, you start to learn like where are the common places where people mess things up in what ways do they usually mess them up in. And yeah, you just get to understand the pitfalls and fun ways that you mess up. But yeah, test out your crazy ideas. I like to say, you know, throw things up on the wall and see what sticks. You'll build, you know, 10 of these APIs and maybe only like 1 or 2 of them are actually worth something. But when they are, it's very fulfilling, I think. I don't know if anyone here's a Lost fan, but this also embodies like the spirit of this talk. Don't tell me what I can't do. I'm gonna build my own APIs, and you know, this is what it's all about. Yeah, these are my closing thoughts. Again, just bringing up, it's super creative, empowering, and rewarding to be able to do this. You're not so like beholden on other people for things when you're able to do this. And yeah, you just learn a lot doing it. Thank you. I know that was pretty quick. Are there any questions? Yes.
Thank you. Quick question. Is there anything you'd throw out as tips or advice in terms of scaling APIs in the future? Anything that it's worth thinking about when you first start writing your code to save you pain in the future if suddenly millions of people want to use your API, for example?
I would say learn about, like if your API is public, learn about how you can implement things like rate limiting. So specifically for FastAPI, it's kind of funny. They have there's a library called Slow API. So that's like it's like a third-party rate limiting API that you can use. So that's a big one. Learning how to do like, if it's like a paid API, learning how to do like authentication properly and that sort of thing too is super important. If there's no other questions, thank you so much for your time. Thank you.